Hi, everyone. Justin here again with our fourth class, Understanding Your Environment. So, the benefit of going to a low or a minimum security camp is most of the guys have phased out of crime. So, because they have a clearly defined release date, you're going to see lower proclivities for violence. It's really that simple. My business partner, Michael Santos, wrote a terrific book called Inside Life Behind Bars in America. His time in the penitentiary with shot collars and walking through puddles of blood. You're not going to see things like that, generally speaking, in a lower camp. And that's a very good thing. Still, to understand your environment or understanding your environment is a crucial component of generating or finding peace of mind in prison. So you've got to understand that you're stepping into an environment where men have lived for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, and it's the only home they've ever known in some cases. In your case, it's going to be a little blip in your life, and you should treat it as such. For that reason, you shouldn't be concerned with what people think of you or your prison reputation. I am against cooperation and informing and speaking with staff. That could certainly lead to troubles. But you should embrace the idea that, unlike Wood was able to do in the lesson plan that you just read, he was kind of concerned with what others thought. Hey, I do my job, you don't. And the last thing you should care about is what a gang member thinks about him. His only goal, or your only goal, is avoiding trouble, drama, and getting home successfully or safely to your family. So it requires making decisions that may be uncomfortable, that may be foreign to your character, doing things where in your mind you may think you're weak. But what do you care what people think about you in prison? You've got to be pursuing your goals. You've got to be deliberate. You've got to begin with the end in mind. You've got to put first things first. And you can't do all of that if you care about your prison reputation. That's utter nonsense. So when coming back to understanding your environment, even though you're in a camp or a low, there is a protocol that exists. So it would be wise to understand that. As an example, when I was in federal prison, I worked in the kitchen, and a prisoner, a gentleman named Gene, serving a few years for a healthcare crime from Northern California, was very upset that he was doing that other prisoners didn't do, or they weren't doing their job, right? So a lot of people won't do their job. You should always do your job. And you can pay someone to do your job. I think it reflects poorly on you. It's certainly a disciplinary infraction, could lead to a lot of drama. You should look to create a job that's 30 minutes or an hour a day like I had, and the rest of your time is for introspection and creating, but you should always do your job. So in this case, this prisoner, Gene from Northern California, was actually doing his job. But it was a very busy day in the kitchen. Chicken and pizza days in the kitchen are very busy because more prisoners come down to eat. And it took like 3 hours to clean up the kitchen. Big deal, right? 3 hours. And this prisoner lamented and said out loud, "Why aren't these effing guys here to work?" And these guys just never showed up to work. And a guard heard him say that. And the guard said, "Well, who's not here?" And he looked at the list, because you're supposed to sign in and sign out for work, even though most of the time you don't. And the guard saw they weren't there. They were paged from camp control. These two huge dudes walked in and said, "Okay, who's the snitch?" And all eyes sort of turned away and then pointed to Gene, who was just venting that he was doing the work of guys who didn't show up. So what happened, of course? Well, Gene, of course, is ostracized. He's viewed as someone who cooperates or an informant or looks to tattletale on other inmates. And here's the disconnect between society and prison. He's punished for doing other people's jobs. The guys who didn't do their job, they went to the SHU for a little while because it was clear they never did it, which then made matters worse for Gene. So understanding your environment begins with, this is a brief period of time in your life. It's a warped environment. You may be forced to do other people's jobs if they don't show up. So what? Just do it. It's a little piece of your day. But by complaining or going to staff, it's going to make it much more difficult to pursue all of the clearly defined goals you should have done in the first few classes. You should have written down what it is you hope to accomplish. So understanding your environment begins with understanding there is a prison protocol. There will be some gang members there who should not be there. And they care more about their prison reputation than anything else. They don't care if they go to the SHU or if they get transferred, if they lose good time, commissary visitation. They do not care. And in some cases, if you're incredibly productive with your time, some of them could become jealous of you. Some of them could be upset by your routine and that you're having a good time in prison. I worked on a blog with Michael Santos from prison where a prisoner, a white-collar defendant serving 10 years, came at me pretty hard in the bathroom and essentially said, "You're a rich prick punk from USC who views this as a country club environment, running every day, writing, this is fun for you. You visit every week. And I responded, I left. I think I handled it the right way rather than kind of responding to him. Well, I wanted to say, well, hey, I thought we were kind of friends, and what's your problem? And I'm involved in my routine and serving my time and living my life. And he was angry. He was jealous. He was resentful that I had visits every week, that I was excited to wake every single day, that I did have a plan. So understanding your environment means there are long-term prisoners who are gang members who are looking potentially to exploit you if you behave poorly. But there's also people you think may be your friends, people with whom you have served time, who sink into despair in prison. It's a hopeless environment. And if you're proactive and positive and putting first things first, that's going to be off-putting to some people, and that's going to make them jealous and angry, and they're going to have some resentment for you. So you shouldn't respond in kind. There's just not enough upside to it. That kind of leads to this difference between prison and society, where we frequently will offer advice to friends and family, right? That happens a lot. Hey, Justin, I'd love your opinion on this. Sure, happy to share. In prison, it's not always a great idea. So understanding your environment, and I'm going to talk about more of this in our final class, win-win, but understanding your environment includes not offering unsolicited advice. For example, when I was in prison standing in line to go into the chow hall, this is when all the banks were getting bailed out. And some prisoner said, Circuit City is my favorite store. And why, if the government's bailing out Merrill Lynch and JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, why aren't they bailing out Circuit City? And a prisoner who had only been in a few weeks said, well, I can tell you why. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. It was the way he said it. Well, I can tell you why. Like the person actually wanted his opinion. Like they were standing in line at a deli waiting for coffee, holding the Wall Street Journal. Let's have a conversation about finance. No, he said, well, I can tell you why. And he proceeded to tell him. And everyone I was thinking, this isn't going to end well. And it didn't end well because this person was embarrassed and called out and said, you've been here 3 effing weeks. And the whole it was an uncomfortable yell. This guy's just trying to offer some advice. So again, understanding your environment, just shut up. You may want to offer some advice, shut up. And that kind of comes down to even friendship. So understanding your environment, coming back to your first day in prison as I kind of close it out here. When you surrender to prison, how are you going to form friendships? How is that going to work? So this timeline our team has created at White Collar Advice. There's my business partner, Michael Santos. Now, of course, I knew Michael, right? Because he'd been in prison for 22. Everybody knew Michael. He had written so prolifically. So when Michael introduced himself to me, I was comfortable meeting Michael because everyone knew him, right? It was great. And he offered some advice and he had good intentions because he was so prolific on the internet. That's different than someone who had come up to me, who his name was Adam, and he was a former stockbroker or money manager or something. And that first day, he's like, hey, man, let me show you around, give you some of the insights. And I'm like, okay, white collar guy, chubby and fat like me, seemed nice enough. I just got there. He's offering a little bit of time, and that's very nice of him. And I ended up walking the track with him for 3 hours that day. Michael used to joke, I see you went for a walk with your best friend, Adam. And unbeknownst to me, and how the hell would I know? Because I'd been in prison for 9 seconds. Adam was someone who loved to speak with staff, loved to talk with staff, and hang around their office, make small talk. Some prisoners may better associate with staff than they may the fellow prisoners, especially if they don't think they're criminals or they don't think they should belong in prison. So it's very normal for some prisoners to speak with staff. Further, he had a tendency, I think, to share information with staff that could be construed as cooperating or informing. And he made a lot of grandiose and huge statements that turned out not to be true. The point is, I didn't understand my environment well enough to not form this friendship. I presumed he's a white-collar defendant, just like me. He's here to help. And instead, I knew within 2 or 3 days that I had formed a connection with the wrong person who had adjusted in a way that was not the way that I knew that I should be adjusting in prison. So now it was sort of uncomfortable because now I lived 10 yards from this person, and I had to kind of tactfully give him the blow off of the century, so to speak, and work my way away from him to the point where we'd walk by one another and not even say hello. Had I better understood my environment, and the reason I'm filming this video for you, so when you get there day one, you don't feel obligated to have to walk the track with someone. Your routine is your routine. You're not beholden to anybody else to have to exercise or join a fitness class or walk the track. You are beholden to your family, to your values, to your priorities, and what it is you hope to do every day. So I've been asked, well, how do I respond, Justin? If someone asks me, just say, no, thank you. I'm good. I'm not ready to walk the track. Thank you. I'm okay. I'm fine. No. Last thing I'm going to say is fitness in prison. I was a long distance runner. I ran around that dusty track very slowly, but I didn't play sports. Healthcare in prison is terrible. So if you're going to understand your environment, you need to understand that healthcare is awful. And if you get hurt, you're not going to get treated as well as you should. For that reason, I'd encourage you, once COVID passes, and it will, and there'll be more normalcy in the prisons, to avoid softball, volleyball, soccer, football, tennis, because if you get hurt, you'll never be the same. And yes, I ran extensively, slowly around that track. Okay, slowly around that track. I could not get hurt because they just don't treat you. So understand your environment. Further, if you're playing softball 3 or 4 days a week, then you have practice and you're beholden to practice and games, and then it transitions into gambling, which is the number one mistake people make in prison. And then they owe money and they call their wife and send money and put it on this guy's books because it just goes poorly. So understanding your environment includes the people with whom you associate, that it's a different dynamic, like offering unsolicited advice is frowned upon. In the last class, I'll talk about ways to actually go ahead and offer some advice in a way that creates a win-win, our final class. But if you can do this and understand this the day that you surrender, you're going to be in a better position to actually pursue your goals. And I think if you look at, I've said this before, you look at people on our team, and I guess I can do this. Where are we? I'll do this in a different video, I suppose, as I jump around. You look at people on our team, they all had very successful journeys in prison. They avoided staff. They avoided, getting into trouble for the hustle. They didn't go to segregation with problems, and they documented their journey. And as I said in the last video, they created assets they can then share with anyone with whom they may want to work. Spend your days doing that, but it's easier if you have understood your environment. And that's how I'm going to wrap up class 4. As my phone is blowing up here to the left. Look forward to seeing you in our 5th and final class. Thank you so much. Welcome any feedback you have on the class, good, bad, and different, ways that I can make it better for others who are traversing this difficult system. Bye-bye.